Thanks, Maxine, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope you had a good festive season and you're raring to go with prioritizing your health this year. Just remember to be kind to yourself and rather make small, sustainable changes to your diet and your lifestyle rather than trying to do everything all at once and then feeling like a failure when you don't achieve that level of perfection. So remember the 80-20 rule. So for most of us, if we do the right thing 80% of the time and allow ourselves a little bit of leeway 20% of the time, we'll do really well. Okay, so in this webinar, we're going to talk about getting the most out of everyday foods without spending any more money and with only a little bit more thought and time going into how you store and prepare your foods. And I wanted to look at this topic because often we focus on the big issues such as what we should be eating, and we don't discuss the little issues which help us to optimize the nutritional value of our food. And there are really some fascinating little tweaks you can make. Maybe a bit of the geeky side of nutrition, but I find it really interesting, so I hope you will as well. All right, so why do we want to optimize the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients that we get from our foods? Well, these act as antioxidants and they catalyze all the biochemical reactions happening in our body. And together that means that we can prevent inflammation, and inflammation is at the heart of most chronic diseases. So there are less vitamins and minerals in our food nowadays than a few generations ago. So there are less minerals in the soil. So that means that even if we're eating exactly the same food as our grandparents ate, we will be getting in less minerals. We also nowadays eat foods that are transported long distances and have been stored for a long period of time, and this decreases their vitamin content. Along with some modern practices such as drinking a lot of coffee. So if you drink coffee or caffeinated tea at the same time as your meals, you don't absorb as many minerals. And we're also consuming less probiotic-rich foods. Because we now have refrigeration and pasteurization, we don't need to use the methods that people used in times gone by, such as fermentation of foods to preserve them, which means that our food is often quite sterile and our gut microbiome suffers as a consequence. So in this webinar, we're going to look at these topics. So decreasing phytates for better mineral absorption, minimizing oxalic acid, avoiding rancidity of our foods, looking at getting some probiotics in cultured foods, how to best use garlic to our advantage, how best to cook fish, decreasing the glycaemic index of carbohydrates. We'll look at frozen blueberries in particular. We'll look at how you can eat foods together to increase iron absorption in this case. And then how the nutritional value of foods can change depending on how ripe they are, for example, bananas. Okay, so all seeds, nuts, grains, and beans contain anti-nutrients or enzyme inhibitors called phytates, which in nature prevent premature germination of these seed-like substances, and they also bind minerals for plant growth so that when the seed does start growing, it will have all the minerals it needs, such as calcium, magnesium, zinc, and iron. So in nature, phytates' role is while the grain stays intact as it goes through the animal's digestive tract, and when the seed starts growing, when it's come through the animal's digestive tract, then the enzyme phytase can act on the phytates so that they release the minerals, and the minerals can be available for the seed to start germinating and growing. But when humans consume foods containing phytates, basically we can't absorb all the minerals from these foods. So like I said, calcium, magnesium, zinc, and iron. So why is that important? Well, all those minerals are essential for our health. So calcium and magnesium we need for, amongst others, good bone and dental health. We need zinc for our immune systems and hormone production. Iron we need to prevent anemia, along with all the other functions that they have in the body. So how can we decrease the phytates in our foods so that we can absorb more minerals? Well, the first step is soaking. So soaking, and then in some cases sprouting or fermentation helps the enzyme phytase to break down the phytates. It also has some additional benefits. So for example, all rice is contaminated with a bit of arsenic, which, as you know, is a poison. And soaking rice and then rinsing it before cooking it, as well as rinsing it again after cooking it, also helps decrease the arsenic content in rice. So there are different recommended times for soaking these grains, nuts, and seeds. And if you subscribe to our mailing list, we'll be emailing you a handout with some of the more common items and how long we recommend that you soak them for. And then some of them will also sprout. So for example, grains like buckwheat and quinoa, once you've soaked them, if you leave them in a sieve and rinse them every 12 hours, they'll start forming tiny little sprouts. And that process, as well as decreasing the phytase in these items, also increases the nutritional value of them. Now, if you don't remember anything else, what you can just think about is the night before or in the evening, think about what you're going to make for dinner the next evening. And if it's a grain like rice or buckwheat or quinoa, you can soak it overnight. And that might be the simplest thing just to remember. So cover it with water, and you can add a little bit of acidic medium, like some lemon juice, and just leave it overnight. And the next morning, you can either leave it in the soaking water or you can just leave it in a sieve. And that will decrease the phytates for when you cook it in the evening. If you are making overnight oats, then oats are actually quite poor in the enzyme phytase. So soaking doesn't actually help all that much, but what really does help is adding a little bit of a grain that is rich in the enzyme phytase. So for example, buckwheat. So you can buy buckwheat flour at most supermarkets and health food shops, and you can just add a teaspoon of buckwheat flour to your portion of overnight oats, and that will help to break down the phytates. And you can also add a bit of an acidic medium, like some yogurt, some kefir, or some lemon juice, which will help. If you do eat raw buckwheat, you can also grind this down in a coffee or a spice grinder to make your own buckwheat flour for this. So now it's not necessary or practical to eliminate all phytic acid from our diet, and it does actually have some beneficial effects. So it is actually an antioxidant in itself. But what we want to do is keep it to a reasonable level so that we ensure that we have enough minerals from our diet. Because, you know, if we're trying to eat a really healthy diet and we're eating lots of nuts, seeds, and whole grains, we might not actually be absorbing enough minerals if we don't follow this step. And if you look at traditional cultures, how they prepared their grains, often you'll find that there was a step of soaking and then sometimes sprouting or fermentation. All right, so another so-called antioxidant is oxalic acid. Now we know that leafy greens such as spinach are rich in minerals like calcium and iron, but they also contain oxalic acid. Now this is what gives leafy greens their bitter taste, and in nature it protects plants a little bit from being eaten by animals and insects. For us, oxalic acid can also bind the minerals so that we can't absorb them well. And in excess and in people who are prone to kidney stones and gout, they can also exacerbate these conditions. So luckily, cooking does destroy oxalic acid. So for example, if you cook spinach, the calcium in spinach is 10 times more bioavailable than raw spinach. Now, which cooking method should you choose? Well, if you steam or stir fry rather than boil for example, spinach, then you won't lose as many of the water-soluble nutrients like vitamins B and C. But it is also healthy to eat raw leafy greens because they do contain anti-cancer compounds. Now, the enzyme that produces these anti-cancer compounds is activated by chopping or chewing, but it is destroyed by heat. So if you do cook your greens, you'll be able to absorb more minerals, but you will also have less of the anti-cancer compounds. So it's good to have a balance. So eating some of your leafy greens, those that are high in oxalic acid, cooked. So for example, steaming your spinach or stirring it into a dish at the last minute. But then choosing the leafy greens that are low in oxalic acid to eat raw. And those are kale, rocket, bok choy, and pak choy. So for example, if you're making a salad or a smoothie, it's better to use kale or rocket rather than spinach. All right, so back to our nuts and seeds and grains. You've probably tasted nuts and seeds that have been sitting around in your kitchen for quite a long time. And when they get that rancid flavor, now that means that the healthy fats have oxidized, and then they're really not so good for our health because they're actually pro-inflammatory. So my advice to you is to store your nuts and seeds and grains and flours in as cold a place as possible to prevent them going rancid. So if you have space in your freezer, that's the best place, otherwise your fridge. And if both of those are full, like mine often are, and it's cold in the wintertime, you can even store them in your shed or outside, as long as they're well sealed. And you can actually use them almost straight away when you take them out of the freezer, because they're not high in water. They don't freeze solid as some other substances do. So nuts that come out of the freezer can actually be eaten almost straight away. So just the one substance I also wanted to talk to you about was freshly ground flax seeds. So when we eat flax seeds, we really do want to eat them in their ground state, because in the whole state, they can't really get broken down by the digestive tract, so we don't really get their benefits, and they just pass through our digestive tract unchanged. But flax seeds do go rancid really quickly. So if you have a coffee grinder or a spice grinder at home, the best thing to do is to buy whole flax seeds and then grind them yourself and store them in the freezer if you can. If you're going to store them in the fridge, just do about as much as you need for a week at a time. Flax seeds are really beneficial because they are high in short-chain omega-3s, so one of the essential fatty acids. They also help control cholesterol, and they also contain lignans, which are cancer-preventing substances. So I would really encourage you to add those to your diet. You can add them to your oats or to your breakfast, or even into smoothies. And they're also really one of the cheapest seeds, but it's really important to use them fresh. If you are going to buy the pre-ground flax seeds, then just pop them into the freezer as soon as you buy them. All right, so you've probably heard quite a bit in more recent years about eating cultured or fermented foods. So the ones that are really quite readily available now from health food stores and even some supermarkets are foods like sauerkraut and kimchi. Those are fermented vegetables. So yogurts, obviously, if you buy yogurt, look for ones that say that they contain live cultures or live bacteria. Some foods are produced using fermentation, like sourdough bread, and even though they are baked, so you won't get any beneficial probiotics, they still do retain some benefits. So, for example, sourdough bread, the minerals are more available, the iron's more available, and also it's more easily digestible. And then there are some other foods and drinks like kefir. So this was traditionally dairy kefir, but you can get coconut milk kefir now. and kefir water, and drinks like kombucha as well. So a lot of these are quite easy to make at home, and we'll be sending out a recipe for you to make your own sauerkraut at home, which is as easy as just using cabbage and salt. And then you can tailor it and add optional extras as well. All right, so when we talk about fermentation, what is happening is bacteria or yeast, or a combination of the two, are converting the sugars and the salts in food into acids such as lactic acid. And that gives fermented foods their unique tangy flavor. And the acidity prevents the growth of food spoilage bacteria, but it does allow proliferation of beneficial bacteria. And these are really good for your gut microbiome. And we know now that gut health has so many benefits for various systems in your body. So studies have shown that consuming fermented products have multiple benefits. So for example, for bone health, reduced risk of chronic diseases, improvement in mood, because most of the neurotransmitters used in the nervous system are produced in the gut actually, and even benefits for weight management. And other benefits of fermented foods are increase in antioxidants and vitamin content, and being more digestible, and the minerals being more bioavailable. So the rule, if you haven't had fermented foods before, is to start low and go slow. So if you're using something like sauerkraut, just start with a teaspoon at a time once a day, and just increase that and see how your digestive system copes with that. All right, so garlic bulbs contain sulfuric compounds, and in nature this helps to ward away animals from the plant. But in our kitchens, most of us would agree that we actually enjoy the flavor that this imparts to our dishes. So usually we'll crush or chop garlic before we use it in cooking, and there's a good reason for that. So crushing or chopping garlic allows the enzyme called allinase to catalyze the formation of a substance called allicin, which in turn breaks down to form a variety of beneficial organosulfur compounds. And the health benefits of these can give, they are antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, they're antimicrobial, which means they fight bacteria and viruses, and they can also improve blood pressure and cholesterol. So one would get the most benefits if you crushed or chopped garlic and ate it raw, but most of us don't enjoy doing this. So studies have been done, and what's been found is if you crush or chop garlic and leave it for 10 minutes, that's enough time for all the beneficial compounds to form. Now, heat does inactivate these compounds. So the trick is really to, when you start cooking a meal, crush or chop your garlic at the beginning so that you know that it will have at least 10 minutes to rest on the chopping board. And then when you add it to your dish, add it at the end of the cooking time. Don't add it at the beginning of the cooking time. And that will allow more of the beneficial compounds to be preserved. All right, so there are multiple benefits to eating fish. So for example, the protein content, the omega-3s, the vitamin D, and the minerals. But how we cook fish actually affects how many of those beneficial omega-3s will be retained at the end of the cooking process. The studies have shown that cooking methods that use high dry heat just destroy quite a lot of the omega-3s. So for example, frying can decrease the DHA and the EPA, those are the long-chain omega-3s, by 70 to 85%. And for example, canning tuna totally destroys these fatty acids, which is why if you're aiming to eat oily fish, although tuna is an oily fish in its natural state, canned tuna can't be counted because it doesn't actually contain any beneficial omega-3s. Microwaving causes a sort of a medium loss between 25 and 55% of omega-3s. But studies that have looked at cooking methods that use gentle heat and more wet heat, such as poaching, have found that these methods don't affect the omega-3 content. So if you poach your fish or if you steam it, you'll be able to retain omega-3s. And then, of course, if you do use high dry heat and your fish tends to burn, then this when you burn food, basically harmful compounds are formed, which can be carcinogenic. So for both of those reasons, it's best to use gentle, moist heat to preserve omega-3s in the fish and also to prevent the formation of harmful compounds. All right, so this is quite an interesting one. So some people don't really enjoy eating leftovers, and then some do, and this is really a reason to embrace your leftovers. So what studies have shown is that with carbohydrates, that would usually be quite simple carbohydrates when they're eaten in their fresh state. So for example, if you eat pasta, rice, bread or potatoes, these are broken down in your gut to form simple sugar, and the sugar is absorbed and insulin is released from the pancreas and basically drives the glucose into cells. And if you don't need those sugars right at that moment, they can be stored as fat. So that's why carbohydrates can be fattening. However, what studies have found is if you cool down these carbohydrates and then either eat them in their cool state or even reheat them, their carbohydrate structure is changed so that a more resistant starch is formed. Now, resistant starch can't be broken down in the gut into simple sugars, and it travels into the colon where it feeds the beneficial bacteria. So, for example, pasta that was cooled and then reheated showed a blood glucose rise 50% less than if it was pasta that was eaten just after boiling. So the benefits are that you'll be absorbing less simple sugar, so less weight gain, less calorie intake, and also you'll be feeding your beneficial gut bacteria. So for example, bread, the best way of consuming bread is to slice it and freeze it, and then toast it before eating it. Berries are probably the healthiest fruits to eat because they're low on the glycaemic index, so they won't cause a sharp spike in blood sugar. And they usually have bright colors, which means that they have lots of antioxidants and other phytonutrients. Now, you might wonder whether eating frozen blueberries is as beneficial as fresh. So they can definitely be as beneficial and even more so for a few reasons. So most of the antioxidants in blueberries are in their skins. The antioxidant called anthocyanins in that really deep purple color. Now, the study has shown that the antioxidants actually become more bioavailable when blueberries are frozen because the ice crystals disrupt the structure of the plant tissue, in a way releasing the antioxidants. And they found that the antioxidants are preserved with a few months of freezing, so they don't really show any sign of decline if you keep the blueberries in your freezer for a few months. And frozen blueberries are great because they're cheaper than fresh. It's really convenient to have them on hand to add into smoothies or add into your breakfast. They defrost quickly if you want to add them to a fruit salad, and you can even eat them straight from the freezer. They make quite a good snack for children. And they're just as nutritious as fresh, if not more so, because they're picked when they're ripe and frozen right away to preserve the nutrients. Now, we know that eating fresh salad is healthy, but you might be wondering whether it's more beneficial to eat fresh or cooked carrots and tomatoes. So carrots are rich in beta-carotene, which is a vitamin A precursor, essential for good vision, immunity, and skin health. And studies have shown that cooking breaks down the cell walls in carrots, which releases the beta carotene. And so if you eat cooked carrots, you'll actually be getting more beta carotene than if you were eating raw carrots. You'll absorb more, should I say. And tomatoes contain lycopene, which is another carotenoid pigment that gives that red color to tomatoes. And it's a great antioxidant which prevents cell damage. Now, gram for gram, cooked tomatoes contain 2 to 10 times as much lycopene as fresh tomatoes. So you don't need to feel at all guilty about eating cooked tomatoes or carrots. Just something to remember, if you do buy cooked tomatoes, rather buy them in a carton or a glass jar if you can, and not in a can. The reason why is because tomatoes are so acidic, they need to add a BPA to the cans to protect the cans and the tomatoes from reacting and coming into contact. And BPA is a chemical that's known to be carcinogenic and also a hormone disruptor. So you want to really avoid buying canned tomatoes if you can. Now, many women struggle with iron deficiency, especially those who have heavy periods during and after pregnancy. And also, interestingly enough, overweight women absorb less iron from their food. It's a bit of a complicated hormonal mechanism. But if we eat vitamin C with our iron, either in a meal or in supplements, it can increase the iron absorption by up to 56%. So if you do struggle with low iron, then what you should do is at each meal, just add a food that is rich in vitamin C. So here some examples. So if you have oats in the morning, add some blackstrap molasses, which is rich in iron, and then a fruit which is rich in vitamin C. So for example, kiwi or papaya or mango. With your lunch, you could add some red pepper and a squeeze of lemon. And with your evening meal, you could have some tomato or broccoli with it. So we've heard that it's good to eat healthy fats with meals. And the one reason to do this is so that we can absorb the fat-soluble vitamins. Those are vitamins A, D, E, and K. So some foods that contain these vitamins do already have fats packaged in with them. So for example, the vitamin D and E in fish does come with some natural fat, and vitamin E in oil, seeds, and nuts already has fat with it. But if we're eating, say, for example, leafy greens or carrots, they don't really have much fat with them. So it's a good idea to add salad dressing to your salad. If you're having fruit, don't just have it by itself, have some nuts or nut butter with it. If you're having a smoothie, add some seeds such as hemp seeds to your smoothie. Eat your carrot sticks with hummus. You get the idea. And that's why if you have supplements that contain vitamins A, D, E, and K, they'll also say eat them together with a meal containing fat. It's because they are fat soluble, so the fat in the meal helps your body to absorb them. So should you eat green or yellow bananas? Well, they're both nutritious, but it depends on what benefits you're looking at getting out of them. So green bananas are high in resistant starch, whereas ripe bananas have their starches changed to sugar. So there's only actually 1% starch in ripe bananas. So if you are diabetic or worried about blood glucose control, it's better to eat the unripe bananas. They're also higher in prebiotics, which will feed your gut bacteria. But ripe bananas, as well as being tasty, are sometimes better tolerated by those who get bloating after eating fruit because the simple sugars are easier to digest. And they can also be useful before or during exercise for a quicker energy boost. All right, so that brings us to the end of our little tips. These are our nutritionists at Hygienist. We're always happy to answer your questions. Maxine, are there any questions that that you want to cover now?
Yeah, we have had a few questions which I have answered. There's a couple more. Just to apologise to everyone because we have run a little bit over time. There's just one question I'm in the middle of responding to. So it's, can I blitz buckwheat from the packet into flour and add to make overnight porridge? So the answer to that would be yes, that would be fine to do. And should chia seeds always be soaked before using if cooking them? Danielle?
So just to go back to the buckwheat, if you're looking to add them to oats for phytates, my understanding is that you can blitz the raw buckwheat groats, but not the roasted ones. So look out for the raw buckwheat if you're looking to do that.
Oh, okay. Thank you for adding that. And
yeah.
yet, should chia seeds? Sorry.
Chia seeds, I would soak them. Just because if you don't soak them, they are also quite hard, like flaxseeds, and I don't think you can get all the beneficial fatty acids from them. You can even go a step further and grind them as well to really make sure that you're getting absorbing all the nutrients from them. But if you're doing that, also store them in the fridge or preferably the freezer, and only do small quantities at a time. But studies have shown different results. Some studies show that soaking them is as beneficial as grinding them. So the jury's out on that one.
Thank you. And then one final question if we have time. And she's just responded as well to say thank you for that. One final question is the same true for canned sardines with regards to low omega-3s like the canned tuna?
No. So those do have a high amount of omega-3s. I can't tell you exactly how much is lost in fresh compared to canning, but definitely those are a good source of omega-3s.
Okay, perfect. I think I can see more questions are coming in. So as I said, we have run over it. I am really sorry. What we will do is everybody that has asked questions, we'll make sure that we email you with a response. But if you do have any other questions, please do get in touch with us. So if you just head to igenist.com, scroll down to the bottom of the page and you can see under the support tab it just say contact us, so there is all the information there that you can use to contact us. There's more questions coming in, so again I apologize, we will get back to you, but that was great. Thank you very much to Danielle for that wonderful presentation. We hope everybody enjoyed it, and as I said, if you haven't already, please ensure that you are subscribed to the mailing list so that we can send you out the recording over the next couple of days. And just a little recap, it's on the igenist.com website. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, there is a little section on the right that says newsletter, and you simply just add in your email address and we'll make sure that that gets sent to you. Danielle, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just a final little word. It's great that so many of you have written in with questions. If you do want to suggest topics that you'd like us to cover in future webinars, do also suggest that.
Yes, please do. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.